Welcome to The Commute, a Bible study podcast designed to turn your commute into an opportunity to grow in your faith. Whether you're sure of what you believe or you're not sure what to believe, this podcast is designed to help you better understand who Jesus is, what the Bible's all about, and how that applies to your life today. I'm your host, Pastor Matt, and I'm excited to dive into this week's episode of The Commute. Hey, welcome to The Commute. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Kenzie. All over again. We're on week 45. And so you were digging into Luke 20 through 24, Proverbs 31, Lamentations 1 through 5, Ecclesiastes 1 and 2, Jeremiah 40 through 52, and Ezekiel 1 through 4. It's a big week. You're making it through a lot of different books right now. But we're going to focus in on Lamentations and Ecclesiastes, if that's all right.
I think we can handle that.
Okay.
I think those are good spots to focus too, because, those are kind of the books that, if you read through the Bible, you're like, oh, okay, let's breeze through that, or sometimes just don't quite know what to do with.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Especially when I think of Lamentations. I mean, it doesn't necessarily scream like joy and rainbows. Just judging by the name. Especially when the first little part there is called How Lonely Sits the City.
Yeah, and I love that you picked this one out, because I think one, you've got some great notes here. One, Jeremiah wrote this. Jeremiah, sometimes known as the weeping prophet. Rough ministry when you're called to tell everybody destruction's coming. And then you not only are telling them, but you actually live to see it happen. Which is kind of crazy. And so Lamentations was written by Jeremiah, but I think one of the cool things about Lamentations is, you've got here that it was written in despair over the ruins of Jerusalem, highly poetic and likely used for public mourning. And I love that public mourning idea, because I think one of the tools we don't dig into enough as 21st century Christians is lament. Just knowing that you can be sad about things. Like, you can walk through challenging seasons and really lament that. And I think too, especially now, walking through COVID, still in COVID, I don't know, it depends on who you ask, right? But there was a lot of lament, that happened in 2020 and extended into 2021. And I think a lot of times it was interesting because we as a culture really wrestle with, how do we deal with that? And yet as Christians, we've got these amazing tools to pour in and really have language around lament and mourning, and even spaces to be able to kind of do that publicly, which is huge. Because you've got Lamentations, but you also have Psalms, where there's a bunch of those in there. So I think knowing that you've got this whole rich tradition in the scriptures of being able to lament is kind of huge.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it also illustrates the human experience. God didn't give us sadness and anger as evidence of our sin.
Yeah.
So it can be used that way, I think, for sure. Yeah. But God is with us in every human emotion. And I think that is huge. I know, I went to college in the middle of COVID, which was really challenging in a lot of different ways. But we did take a lot of time in our daily chapel services and things like that to just acknowledge that things suck sometimes.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of power in just being like, that sucks.
I don't laugh at that. I don't laugh at that comment. Ha, you're wrong. No, but I think it is true, and to have that space for that is huge, and language around it is really big as well.
I think it's really common, at least from what I've noticed, for people to, in their sadness and anger, to feel distant from God, and sometimes that's because we paint God as this happy, blessing man, which he is.
Yeah.
But also, we have to remember that Jesus was human and he wept
Mm-hmm.
and he went through all of these things. So he understands us. And even in these moments when they were dealing with the ruins of Jerusalem, how horrible would that be to live through that? But God was never absent. And I think that it's hard to remember that in those moments where we're not feeling ourselves, not feeling happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool because Paul, highlights this in the New Testament. He says, you're supposed to walk alongside people in those moments. He says, weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. Mm-hmm. Rejoice with those who rejoice. What's he saying? He's saying, like, be a church and be a people that can walk alongside people in those moments. It's okay if, somebody comes in and they're like, oh man, I'm at church today, but I'm not feeling great. Well, that's okay. Like, this is the place to be, right? Because this is a community of people that'll walk with you in that. And then too, a community of people that celebrate with you. And, I think oftentimes we kind of take more of a social media approach to our faith lives where we're like, well, let me promote everything that's going well, and then let's bury that stuff that's not going well. Instead of realizing that, like, God created the church to walk with you, whatever those moments are. And so I think, a book of Lamentations is not just great language around that, but a huge encouragement for that.
Yeah.
And I like the shift too, because you've got Lamentations, which is helping you lament, Ecclesiastes, which I love because I think Ecclesiastes is an example of a book that can give you insight you would probably never be able to get on your own, or never be able to get on your own to the extent that it's given in Ecclesiastes. So what am I talking about? Solomon, richest man in the world, wisest man in the world, David's son, leads Israel through a glory period of their history. Really great at following God at first, right? But then he starts marrying all these wives, and then starts bringing their gods into worship and kind of creates a big thorn in the side of Israel, and his own life too. But, one of the things that was interesting is he writes this book, Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes is essentially like a really big thought experiment on testing things to their limits and seeing where they lead, if they'll really lead to the things you think they will. So what do I mean? Well, he's the wealthiest man in the world. So he's able to test wealth to its very limit. And he knows at the end of the day, he says it's meaningless. And then he tests relationships to their limits. And he's a king and the wealthiest man in the world. So lots of relationships, right? He had hundreds of wives, right? Tests that all the way to its limits. And what does he says? It's meaningless. And then he tests wisdom to its limit. All the education in the world, why is it? It's meaningless. Right? Are you catching a theme here? Right? So he keeps calling things meaningless. And what he's saying is it's hevel in the Hebrew, which is like this idea of like a mist, right? And so what he's saying is it's like, one of the things I take from it is he's saying it's something that looks like it has form and substance, but it doesn't. It like evaporates quickly. It would be like if this cup on the table was hevel, it would be like you just throw your hand through it, right? And there's nothing there. And so I think that's something to kind of keep in mind as you're reading through is Solomon's giving you a chance to try something and see where it really leads.
Yeah. Absolutely. I always forget that Solomon was like the richest man in the world, and confirmation actually has been a really good reminder of that for me, because we went through a bunch of the kings, David, Solomon. We're getting to the point where where Israel and Judah are separate and are going their own way. But I also think that it's really cool. I really have always loved the book of Ecclesiastes because it's very realistic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of shy away from Lamentations and Ecclesiastes and Job and all of these books because they're sad, or at least we perceive them to be sad, or hopeless. Everything is meaningless. I mean, that doesn't really come off as a particularly encouraging sentiment. But I think exactly to your point, Pastor Matt, of it's kind of just talking about how everything earth side just leads to us wanting more.
Yeah.
Like, Solomon, the richest man in the world, tests it, and at the end of it, he's like, so what?
Yeah. And I think that gives you important insight because, I scroll through my Instagram feed and I will tell you a common theme. A common theme on the Instagram feed is if you just have a little bit more of this, whatever this is, you'll be happy. You'll be fulfilled. You'll have what you need. And depending on your age, gender, demographic, it'll be a different thing that they post in your feed, and very specific to you, by the way. And
Seems like there's a story there. But...
Yeah. And so what I would kind of like encourage you and point out to you is this, like, Solomon's already done the heavy lifting for you at a level you could never do it. Like, unless you're, Bill Gates meets The Rock meets, like, Malcolm Gladwell, some brilliant person, right? Like you're not going to be able to test all these things out, but you could take Solomon's word for it and actually find a wisdom you could never find on your own that will strengthen you and set you up in life in a way that could lead to your thriving, which I think is huge.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, when we focus on God, we learn that none of those things matter. Really, what matters is our eternal salvation through Christ. And God gives us everything we need, and sometimes God gives us more than we need.
Yeah.
And those are blessings, and those are great things. But everything that we have, when we attach our worth to it, when we attach our excitement to it even, we land flat on our face every time. Like, you can buy as many cool things as you want, specific to you off of Instagram. But, I mean, eternally, what matters is that you're saved.
Yeah.
And that Jesus died for you, that God loves you. And it might also be nice to have the thing you bought on Instagram. It's a good both and.
Yeah, it's kind of like, one time I heard Matt Chandler say it this way. It's like, being a Christian, the end gets to point to something so much bigger. So, like, if you don't know God, if you don't know Jesus, you could just sit down and have a really great steak, right? And you're like, this is a great steak, but it ends there, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a Christian, if you have Jesus, right, you can sit down and have that same great steak, and you're like, this is a great steak. And man, does it show the goodness and glory of God. And so it like moves to this place that's like far beyond anything else. And so it's no longer important how good the steak is or not, because you have a God who's good. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, really cool stuff in here. So I hope you dig into it. Maybe hopefully that helps you kind of think about it or see it in a new way. We have other great resources for you. Just check out the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app or bethlehemchurch.live website. And of course, we'd love to see you in person. But if you can't be there in person, live stream us through Bethlehem Church Live on YouTube or online. And till next time, it's a joy hanging out with you right here on The Commute. Thanks for checking out this episode of The Commute. For more information on The Commute or to join the Commute Bible reading plan, simply download the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app or go to bethlehemchurchlive.com/thecommute.